When Jennifer Grey first heard the producers wanted Patrick Swayze for Dirty Dancing, her response was immediate. Anybody else, please. She had already spent 3 months trapped with him on Red Dawn, watching him run the set like a guy's club, pulling pranks, being late. She had decided, privately and firmly, that she never wanted to work with him again. So when the most famous dance romance in movie history was about to be built on two people who actively did not want to be in the same room, something had to give. What changed her mind was watching him walk into a dance screen test and become instantly the only person who could play Johnny Castle. Nearly 4 decades later, Jennifer Grey has finally said, plainly, what that partnership actually cost her, what it gave her, and what it wishes she could say to a man who has been gone since 2009. Jennifer Grey was born on March 26, 1960, into a family that had already made peace with the idea that performance was simply how the Greys understood the world. Her father was Joel Grey, the Oscar and Tony-winning star of Cabaret, a man whose entire career was built on commanding a stage with precision and intensity. Her mother, Jo Wilder, was also an actress and singer. Jennifer grew up backstage, in dressing rooms, watching her parents work, absorbing the specific knowledge that performance was not a fantasy, but a discipline. I grew up knowing I was the luckiest girl in the world, she has said. There was no doubt in my mind my parents loved me, still love me. She has spoken decades later about having 2 90-year-old parents she talks to every single day, a kind of continuity rare in any family, let alone one shaped by show business. That foundation, secure, theatrical, watched over, gave her the early confidence to step into an industry that would, in time, test every part of that confidence she had. And there was something else underneath the warmth of that childhood that Jennifer would not fully understand until she was an adult. In 2015, at the age of 82, Joel Grey told the world publicly, for the first time, that he was gay. Jennifer had actually known since her late 20s, long before the rest of the world did, and when she found out, what she felt was not shock, but heartbreak. Heartbreak that her father had not been able to live his whole truth for an entire lifetime. And underneath that heartbreak, something else, gratitude. If he hadn't built his life exactly the way he did, she has said, she would not exist. My gratitude for him to sacrifice himself so that he could have a family, and I got to be his daughter. That, to me, is an enormous gift that he gave to me. She made her film debut in 1984's Reckless, and that same year appeared in 2 films that would shape the rest of her career in ways she could not have predicted. The first was The Cotton Club. The second was Red Dawn, the Cold War action film in which a young Patrick Swayze led a group of teenagers fighting a Soviet invasion of the American heartland. It was, by Grey's own description, exactly the wrong kind of movie for her. Loud, macho, dominated by a male caste culture that left her feeling like a fish out of water. Patrick was playing pranks on me and everybody, she said later. It was just like macho, and I just couldn't take it. I was just like, please, this guy, that's enough with him. 2 years later, in 1986, she landed the role that would have been, for most actresses, the defining moment of an entire career. Jeannie Bueller, the sharp-tongued sister in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was on that set that she met Matthew Broderick, and the two quietly became a couple, though the world did not yet know it. Nobody could have guessed, watching that film's success unfold, what was waiting just over a year away, both the role that would make her immortal and the tragedy that would arrive in almost the exact same breath. When Dirty Dancing began casting in 1987, Jennifer Grey had already been attached to the role of Frances "Baby" Houseman for some time. Then producers floated Patrick Swayze's name for Johnny Castle, and Grey said no in the clearest possible terms. She had survived Red Dawn once. She had no intention of doing it again. But before their screen test, Swayze approached her directly and apologized, genuinely, without prompting, for how he had behaved during their first film together. It was a small gesture, and it changed everything that followed. When he walked into the room for the dance test, all of Grey's resistance evaporated in the space of a few minutes. He was a serious dancer, trained in male ballet, and the physical authority he carried made every lift look effortless for him. It was effortless for him. It was, she has admitted, her own fear that made it hard, her lack of trust that somebody would actually take care of her, physically, in the air. That tension between them, real, unmanufactured, occasionally uncomfortable, became, against all odds, the exact thing the film needed. Grey has described it with unusual precision in her 2022 memoir, Out of the Corner. The same way Baby and Johnny were not supposed to be together, were not a natural match. She and Swayze were not a natural match either, and the fact that they were forced into proximity, forced to rehearse together, forced to trust each other physically in lift after lift after lift, created a synergy that read on screen as genuine chemistry, because in its own complicated way, it was. There is a famous scene in the film, Johnny dragging Baby out onto the dance floor, her resisting, him visibly frustrated, that took roughly 20 takes and was kept in the final cut, specifically because the anger was not acting. Swayze's real exasperation with a young, frightened actress who kept crying and kept losing focus is on the film forever, preserved because it served the story perfectly. Patrick Swayze himself, years later, described what was happening underneath that friction with more generosity than Grey often gave herself credit for. Jennifer Grey is an incredibly available actress, he said. You do all the work, the history, the subtext, the subtleties of what a character does to protect themselves. And then when the camera rolls, you have to have the courage to throw all that work out the window and let something real happen. He said she was truly gifted at that. He also admitted his own frustration plainly, trying to keep this girl serious, trying to keep her from crying, trying to get her past her fear and her ego. It was, he said, really a teaching situation. He had been a dancer his entire life. She had enormous natural talent that needed to be nourished. And what made Baby work as a character, what made an entire generation fall in love with her, was precisely that visible, unguarded vulnerability that Swayze had spent the production trying to coax out of her, and that Grey had spent the production trying to hide. Two crucial details from the shoot reveal exactly how much was actually being asked of her. Grey was terrified of the lifts, genuinely physically terrified, in a way that Swayze, who had no physical fear at all, could not entirely understand. To prepare for the climactic water lift, they practiced in a lake that was painfully cold, the kind of cold that makes it nearly impossible to perform fun and sexy while your body is fighting to function. When she finally executed the lift correctly, what she felt was not romance. It was the specific euphoria of walking straight through fear and surviving it. During another pivotal scene, she was actually sick with food poisoning, fighting the urge to throw up, while performing one of the most physically demanding sequences of the entire film. None of that exhaustion, that fear, that nausea made it into the finished product as anything other than what looks like total commitment. It was total commitment. It simply cost more than anyone watching could see. Dirty Dancing was released in August 1987, and it arrived in Jennifer Grey's life at almost exactly the same moment as the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Weeks before the premiere, she was in Northern Ireland with Matthew Broderick when their car, driven by Broderick, crossed into the wrong lane and collided head-on with another vehicle. The two women in the other car, a 63-year-old mother and her 28-year-old daughter, were killed instantly. Broderick survived with serious injuries. Grey survived too, conscious, alone on a country road in the middle of nowhere, the only person not unconscious and not dead, with no answers for anyone who needed them. "I was the only living witness," she has said. "I didn't have the answer." She suffered severe whiplash and spinal damage that would not be fully addressed for nearly 30 years. The car accident in Ireland, she would later say, was top 3 traumas of my life, maybe top 1. The pleasure of Dirty Dancing's success and the horror of that crash arrived almost simultaneously, inseparably linked in her memory in a way that no amount of time has ever fully untangled. "They are inextricably linked," she said. "The pleasure of that moment, that surprise arrival, it never felt good. It never felt like what I'd hoped my whole life it would feel like." The film itself became something almost nobody on the small, troubled production had predicted. Made on a low budget, shot in conditions Grey would later describe as cursed: rain, mosquitoes, illness, injury, even a burglary on set, Dirty Dancing went on to become the first film to sell 1 million copies on home video. "Nobody puts baby in a corner" became one of the most quoted lines in the history of American film. Grey received a Golden Globe nomination. She had been paid $50,000 for the role. What came after fame was not what she expected. Hollywood, having decided she was America's sweetheart, also decided that her nose, distinct, unconventional, hers since birth, was a problem to be solved. Her mother had had a nose job. Her grandmother had had one. Her aunt had had one. It was in the particular way certain things become inevitable in families and industries simultaneously. Simply assumed that Jennifer would eventually do the same. She resisted for years. Then the money from Dirty Dancing's success did not translate into ongoing work, and she found herself famous and unable to support herself in any sustainable way. "I thought, okay, maybe I just have to say uncle," she said. "I'll do it for my career." The first rhinoplasty did not go as planned. A second surgery, intended to correct an irregularity from the first, went further than she expected, more extensive, more permanent. The result left her, in her own words, with a nose that was truncated, dwarfed, unrecognizable. She has described the aftermath with a directness that few public figures allow themselves. "I went into the operating room a celebrity and came out anonymous. It was like being in a witness protection program or being invisible. Photographers who had once hounded her for years walked past her without a flicker of recognition. An airline employee checking her identification refused to believe that the woman standing in front of her and the actress from Dirty Dancing were the same person, and treated her," Grey said, "as if she were trying to get away with something. It was surreal," she said. "It was devastating in terms of my career." She considered changing her name entirely and starting over. She did not. She kept working under the name everyone knew and the face almost nobody recognized, and the strange gap between the two became eventually. the subject of her own short-lived sitcom in the late 1990s, a show that turned her nose job into a running joke before the world had developed much capacity for that kind of self-aware comedy. She has spoken about it with an honesty that costs something to give, even now, decades later. Her 11-year-old daughter, watching Dirty Dancing for the first time, only recently noticed the change immediately and without judgment, and Gray, rather than deflecting, told her the truth. There has been no attempt to pretend the decision was simple or that she regrets nothing, or that the surgery was purely a victimless, professional calculation. It was, by her own account, the product of decades of other people insisting something about her was a problem, until she absorbed that insistence as her own belief. The problem was, she has said plainly, that I didn't believe enough in myself. Through all of it, the friction between her and Patrick Swayze on Dirty Dancing had long since resolved into something closer to deep mutual respect, even if it never became the easy, natural friendship the public assumed had existed all along. They were not natural mates, she has said plainly. We might have bugged each other. We might have been annoyed by each other. We were young. But everybody loved him. He was a good guy, such a kind person. Patrick Swayze died on September 14th, 2009, after a battle with pancreatic cancer. He was 57 years old. The world had loved him as Johnny Castle for over 2 decades by then, had quoted his lines at weddings and karaoke nights and quiet moments alone, and the loss landed with the particular weight reserved for people who had shaped something universal out of something deeply personal. Jennifer Grey, when asked what she would say to him now, has answered the question more than once, in more than one interview, always circling toward the same core regret. I wish I could tell him, I'm sorry, she has said. I'm sorry, I was just young and scared and had some idea of how it was supposed to be. I'm sorry I couldn't just appreciate and luxuriate in who you were, instead of wishing you were more like what I wanted you to be. And then underneath the apology, the thing she actually believes, the thing that matters more than the regret. Who cares? You were the best Johnny I could ever have had. In 2010, the year after Swayze died, Grey signed up for Dancing with the Stars. The timing was not incidental. She had just been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, discovered almost by accident during medical exams related to the lingering neck damage from the 1987 car crash, the same accident she once called one of the worst things that ever happened to her, and would later credit, in its strange way, with saving her life. Patrick had just passed, she said, and all of a sudden I was realizing, why am I not dancing? Why am I letting anything stand in my way of my joy? For nearly 25 years after Dirty Dancing, she had not really danced, not even at weddings. She had been too self-conscious, too certain that anyone watching would be disappointed in the gap between baby on screen and Jennifer in real life. She went on the show anyway, in her 50s, grieving her co-star and recovering from cancer surgery. And she won. The Mirrorball Trophy went home with the woman who had spent 25 years too afraid to dance at her own friends' weddings. A Dirty Dancing sequel has been in development for years, with Grey attached to executive produce and reprise the role of Baby, now decades older. She has been careful and protective about what the new film will actually be. To make a movie without Patrick is already an enormous challenge, she said. It will never be that movie, and it should never try to be that movie. It will be its own movie. She has hinted that the adult Baby may find herself in some new way back in a corner of her own older, but still working out how to get herself out of it. Her 11-year-old daughter, watching Dirty Dancing for the first time, noticed the difference in her mother's face immediately, and without judgment. "You look really different in the movie," the girl said, cuddled in bed the morning after. "You looked really beautiful." Gray said, "Thank you, honey," and meant it, and did not pretend the comment was simple. She has been honest, in interview after interview, about the fact that the surgery was never really about her nose. It was about not believing enough in herself, about an industry's assumption becoming eventually her own internalized doubt, the way so many things eventually do when enough people repeat them long enough. At 65, Jennifer Grey has built a life that includes all of it. The trauma of Ireland, the friction with Swayze that became one of the most beloved on-screen romances in American film, the surgery that cost her her own face and her career simultaneously, the cancer, the dancing she finally allowed herself to do again. "You don't get out unscathed," she has said. "For me, the most painful moments, the most confounding situations, are the ones I have grown the most from, the ones that were necessary to get me to where I am today, which is happier than I've ever been. That's the truth." "Look what we did," she would tell Patrick Swayze if she could see him now. "We were playing kids, and we were really young. Look what we did when we were younger. It was so hard, and we did it." If this story moved you, if Dirty Dancing was ever the movie you watched with your mother, your daughter, your grandmother, the one that taught you something about courage and fear and finally stepping out onto the floor, leave a comment below. We will see you in the next one.